I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 9, Project Odin, Newport News, Virginia. Vice Admiral Ingalls was stressed beyond belief. His pet project of developing a truly revolutionary weapon platform for the 21st century was both a dream and a nightmare. The challenge of creating a new technology and weapon system was an enormous undertaking. Trying to create it to save his country from certain doom, however, was almost too much. The U.S. Navy had suffered some horrific losses these past 5 months. They had to find a way to regain their naval advantage and supremacy if they were to have any hope of stopping this endless Chinese onslaught. The Chinese had caught them all off guard with how rapidly they'd been able to negate their forces in Hawaii. These new battleships could prove to be the needed game-changer to return the balance of power in the Pacific back to America. Ingalls constantly wondered, though, if they could build out the weapon systems fast enough. He sat in his chair, gazing out the window of his office for a moment at the two massive domed structures outside. America's newest superweapon, he thought. Will it be ready in time, though? He asked himself as he ran his fingers through his hair. He swiveled back around to face the 4 men sitting in front of his desk. Mr. Lake, it's been 2 months since the President signed an executive order giving the new hires an interim TS clearance so they could get hired and start work. What's the holdup? Our 2 ships out there are still falling behind schedule, Admiral Ingalls said as he waved his arm toward the domes outside. We need these ships to start their weapons testing in a few months so we can get them ready to deploy by the end of the year. He felt incredibly annoyed at the continued delays in the project, and his voice betrayed it. The CEO and COO of the Newport News Shipbuilding Company glanced at each other for a moment before reaching a silent agreement that the COO would respond. Admiral, this is an incredibly complex weapons platform we're building. You've asked us to speed the construction of this ship up by nearly 3 years. That's a tall order, even during peacetime. During the middle of war, it's nearly impossible. Ingalls paused for a moment to take a deep breath and collect his thoughts so he wouldn't explode with all the anger and frustration he felt. Finally, he let it rip. During World War II, it took U.S. shipbuilders between 13 and 15 months to build a carrier. It took our shipbuilders 5 days to build a Liberty Troop transport ship. This was with 1940s technology and without automation, 3D printing, and many other advanced construction tools and advancements. He stopped for a moment to let that sink in before he leaned forward in his chair. Our country has been invaded. We are in the fight of our lives right now. We've lost 3 carriers in this war and have another 5 more in the shipyards for repairs or complex overhaul. Our naval presence in the Pacific has been devastated, and as a consequence, the Chinese have invaded us. I don't care what you have to do, you get these ships back on schedule, he insisted, smacking an open hand on the table. The men before him sat there silently, seemingly stunned. I don't care what other projects you have to strip workers from to make this happen, but this is your number 1 priority for the U.S. Navy, Admiral Ingalls continued. If I have to, I'll have the President call you directly to get this project back on track. Hell or high water, these ships had better be ready to test their weapons by the end of summer and ready for their shakedown cruise in November. Do you understand? The CEO of the company leaned forward. Yes, Admiral, he responded quietly. "We'll do our best to get the ships back on track." Ingalls interrupted him. "No, not your best. These ships have to deploy. If we don't stop the endless flood of Chinese forces landing in California and Mexico, we may lose half the country by this time next year. I need you to understand how critical it is that these ships be made ready for war." The project manager, Mr. Lake, finally broke into the conversation. "Admiral, if you'll allow me to strip the repair crews from the Stennis and Nimitz and move them from the west coast to here, we should be ready to begin testing the weapons system by August 15th. Ingalls smiled. "See? That wasn't so hard." "But what about getting those two ships ready?" stammered Mr. Bullard, the company's lead project manager, who oversaw all of the construction projects. "We're maybe 5 months away from completing their reports." Ingalls shook his head. "This is far more important than getting those ships fixed. As your workers finish repairs on the damaged destroyers and cruisers, you can move them out to Washington State to finish the overhaul of those two carriers. But in the meantime, this has to happen." The CEO nodded. "Admiral, we'll shift the workers around today," he asserted. "We'll do whatever is necessary to get this project back on schedule. With the adjustment to the security clearances, we now have 50,000 new workers currently in orientation and completing their 30-day assessments. In a month, we'll be able to get most of these projects back on track." "Excellent, gentlemen. Now, if y'all could please excuse yourselves, so Mr. Lake, Mr. Bullard, and I can discuss the specifics of the ship, that would be greatly appreciated." Yes, of course," replied the CEO, standing up. "Thank you, Admiral, for allowing us to shift some folks around and for helping us get through the security clearance logjam." The CEO and COO both left the room, leaving Mr. Lake and Bullard alone with Ingalls. Despite the other two men being the leaders of their company, they had not been read on to the program, and therefore did not know the nitty-gritty specifics of the ships or what they were truly capable of. The only reason Admiral Ingalls had wanted to speak with them was to make sure they understood that their $5 billion completion bonus was on the line if they didn't meet the year-end delivery date. "I think they got the message," Ingalls thought to himself as he smiled. "Okay, now that we have your bosses backing you guys again, let's get started." Mr. Lake smiled and opened the folder he had with him. He cleared his throat. "Admiral, as of 2 weeks ago, we got the reactors in both ships fueled. We initiated the reactor startup 2 days ago, and thus far they are performing normally. Over the next few days, we'll be increasing the reactor load to make sure everything is fine before we seal up that portion of the ship. This is the last major obstacle we needed to overcome before the ship could be fully closed up. In another month, we'll officially be ready to launch her into the water, if you so desire." Admiral Ingalls held up a hand to pause him. "We're going to hold off on launching the ships until we're a lot closer to conducting their weapons testing," he insisted. "Once we bring them out of their cover, the secret's going to be out." Mr. Lake nodded. "I think that's a good idea as well, sir. As to the weapons systems, tomorrow we'll be installing the last of the VLS pods. We're going to begin testing the firing circuits before we move to the next platform." Mr. Bullard interjected. "I still have some reservations about the direct energy weapon. We're not quite ready for it. The Nevada test range has not been able to demonstrate its effectiveness beyond 60 miles. "Whoa, wait a second," exclaimed Ingalls. "That's not what I read last week from them." "Yes and no, Admiral," Mr. Lake calmly insisted. "What you read, sir, was that the direct energy weapon was able to successfully hit the target at 210 miles. However, it was not able to hit the target with enough energy to destroy it at that range. The effective destructive range is currently around the 60 or so miles." Ingalls let out a huge huff of air at the thought of another possible delay. "Look," he said, "you guys have to get this sorted out. Power isn't going to be a problem with this ship. If you need more help from DARPA or some egghead groups at a university, then let me know and we'll make it happen. Keep testing it at the Nevada range. We also need to make sure the gun crews who will be working this system are continually trained. The gunners and the technicians need to know how to effectively work and repair the system before we deploy it." Mr. Bullard jotted a few notes down, then muttered, "I'll get with DARPA and see if they have any ideas on how to increase its lethality range." On that note, I'm proud to report the railgun tests have been completed and were successful, announced Mr. Lake. We'll be able to mount both caliber railguns. With the added height and using an arc when it fires, we'll effectively be able to hit sea or land objectives as far as 360 miles away with more than enough destructive power to pulverize whatever it targets. The smaller caliber point defense guns will have an effective range of 120 miles, more than enough range to take on enemy missiles or projectiles fired at them or the battle group. Ingalls nodded. He was excited about this new weapon system. After the debacle with the Zumwalt-class ships, they needed to prove that a railgun system was not some futuristic toy to dream about. This gun system would provide the new superships an unparalleled amount of firepower. It could save them from having to use cruise missiles or aircraft to hit other ships or land targets. "What about the projectiles themselves? Did we get that piece sorted?" asked Admiral Ingalls. Mr. Lake smiled. "Yes. At the Nevada range, we're now using 3D printed projectiles to fire the railguns. They work. We've moved from theory to fact in less than 6 months. DARPA also completed their test on the various types of warheads. We can use a solid projectile that'll rely solely on its velocity and density to hammer its targets, and we still have the proximity high-explosive rounds." The Navy had struggled with projectile costs in the past. Then a young officer at the Naval Research Lab had suggested they use industrial-grade 3D printers to just make the rounds on the ship. Now that the tests had proved successful, it would be a game-changer for Navy logistics going forward. No longer would they have to maintain a large stockpile of projectiles on each ship. Ingalls smiled. He stood but motioned for them to stay seated. He walked over to the window and looked at the 2 massive bubbles that were shielding his 2 babies from prying eyes. Then he turned around. "What about the EMP projectiles?" he asked. Mr. Lake shrugged. "Still a work in progress. It's not that the EMP can't be fitted into the projectile. The challenge is making it still function after it's been fired. Right now, the electronic innards of the warhead get fried when they're shot through the railgun. The magnetic field that runs through it currently fries the trigger device and wipes out its software code." Admiral Ingalls crinkled his eyebrows. "Wasn't there talk about encasing the EMP equipment inside some sort of magnetic shield?" "Yes," Mr. Bullard answered. "But in order to make the shield work so the EMP can still detonate and the projectile still work with the magnetic system that shoots it, the shell size would need to be increased beyond what our current barrels have been designed for." Ingalls sighed audibly. "How much larger does the new barrel need to be to make it work? And if we adjusted the barrel size, how much would that throw a wrench into everything else?" Looking at his notes again, Mr. Lake replied, "There are several variants DARPA's been working on. One included a projectile skin that would fall off once it was fired, kind of like what happens with a tank sabot round. But even that variant is still going to require a larger barrel. Right now, to make this thing work, it's going to require us to change the barrel dimensions from a 12-inch slug to a 16-inch. Ingalls shook his head in frustration. "Okay, so if we move to 16-inch barrels and projectiles, would the EMP round still work?" "Technically, yes," Mr. Bullard replied. "It should be able to generate an EMP field of roughly 1 kilometer from detonation. The more difficult question DARPA is still trying to grapple with is whether the EMP field generated would be strong enough to disable some of the more hardened electrical systems of a military target. Okay, then here's what we're going to do, said Ingalls. Develop a short-barreled 16-inch gun so DARPA can begin their tests. If, and I emphasize if, it works, then we can retrofit the ships with the new gun barrels. We can hold off on installing the main guns and the turret for as long as possible, but time is running out. Once the system is proven to work, then we can make the necessary modifications at a later date. Okay, we'll get on this right away, Mr. Lake offered. It may delay our ability to field the railgun system for the weapons test on August 15th, but if this works, I think you'll agree it's worth the delay. He wrote a few more notes down on his paper. Agreed. Let's move to the next platform, Ingalls said. Mr. Bullard raised his hand. I have a concern that I believe we need to address before it becomes a major problem, Admiral. Will Lockheed be able to deliver the LRASMs we need for both ships? He asked. It's a lot of missiles, and we're still burning through a ton of cruise and standard missiles right now. Admiral Ingalls sighed. This was one of his biggest concerns, aside from getting these two ships completed. Delivering 4,000 LRASMs by the end of the year was a tall order, considering the company was still trying to ramp up production of their existing weapon platforms and aircraft. The restart of the F-22 program was probably the biggest challenge Lockheed was facing, especially considering their aircraft production facility in Fort Worth had already come under attack several times. It's on my radar, Ingalls said. Let me deal with it. In the meantime, do what you can to keep things on track. I hate to cut our meeting short, but I've got to handle a few other fires aside from this one. And with that, he concluded the discussion. Chapter 10. Operation Viking. Halden, Norway. Halden Prison. Eric Jan blinked a couple of times as he used his hand to shield his eyes from the bright glare of the sun. As his vision adjusted, he saw two guards motion for him to get in the back of the prison van. He trudged over to the rear door and climbed in. When he sat down, one of the guards placed a set of handcuffs on him and strapped him into the seat. Then the guard closed the door and locked it before opening the front passenger door and getting in. Looking around the van, Eric just sighed. For the time being, he was being held in Halden prison while he awaited trial in Oslo. Thus far, his friend at the Ministry of Justice had prevailed in preventing him from being handed over to the Americans. But how much longer that would last was anyone's guess. Once the two guards got settled in the vehicle, Eric asked, "Where are we headed?" They hadn't told him where they were taking him when they had told him to be ready to leave the prison a couple of hours ago. The driver looked at Eric in the rearview mirror. "You're being moved back to Oslo so you can meet with the Ministry of Justice. That's all they told us," one of the guards replied. Then he closed the screen that separated him from them, giving him some privacy to think. The van drove for 30 minutes before one of the guards opened the screen. "We're stopping in Sarpsborg along the way for a coffee," he announced. "Would you like one as well?" Eric smiled at the kindness of the guard. "Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you for asking." They drove for another 15 minutes and eventually stopped at an Esso station just off the highway. "I'll be back in a moment," said the kind guard as he got out to go inside the deli that was inside the petrol station. The driver of the vehicle stayed with Eric. 10 minutes later, the guard returned with a cup holder containing 3 coffees. He used his free hand to open the back door and proceeded to give Eric a hot cup of morning java. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Eric took the cup and managed to take a sip, despite his hands being cuffed. The guard climbed into the passenger seat and handed the third coffee to his partner. Eric took several more sips and felt the caffeine immediately hit his body. Seconds later, he suddenly felt woozy. He placed his drink in a nearby cup holder as he sought to try and steady himself. Eric leaned his head back briefly, then slipped into the black abyss. Seth stared at the man before him. Eric Jan, one of the most influential financial figures in the world. To be honest, he'd never heard of Eric prior to his interrogation of Roberto Lamy. Then again, he wasn't really a part of the financial circles Mr. Jan ran in either. They'd strapped the prisoner into a chair, and one of the guards had made sure the sensory deprivation devices were attached to Mr. Jan. Now he was ready to be woken up. Seth snapped the smelling salt packet open, placed it near the man's nose, and waited a second. A moment later, Eric woke with a start. He tried unsuccessfully to look around the room to see where he was. The device on his head flooded his vision with flashing lights. Then suddenly, Eric seemed to realize his hands and legs were firmly tied to the chair he was sitting in. Unable to hear or see anything, he called out for the guards in Norwegian. Seth reached over and pulled the noise-canceling headphones off his prisoner's ears. He didn't speak a lick of Norwegian, but Seth knew he would be understood perfectly well if he spoke in English. "Eric, calm yourself. There are no guards to call. It's just us now," he said. Eric's mouth gaped open in surprise for a moment. "You can't treat me like this," he shouted, sounding deathly terrified. "I demand to be let go. I am a prisoner within the Norwegian justice system. You can't just kidnap me with impunity." Seth smiled at the statement. While Eric couldn't see him shaking his head, he had to try hard to stifle a laugh. "Eric, it's over. The government has given you over to us. You're going to come back to America with me. The only question that remains to be seen is if you'll be going to America as a man who is cooperating with our investigation, or as someone who is still trying to protect his co-conspirators." Seth watched the man think that over for a minute before he asked, "So, are you saying there is room to cut a deal?" Seth smiled and motioned for the guard to take the rest of the sensory deprivation equipment off the prisoner. A moment later, the entire headset was removed from Mr. Jan, revealing a man who looked tired but determined. A true businessman, always angling for a slice of the pie, Seth thought. He leaned in toward Eric, lowering his voice. "A deal could be had, but you'd have to have something worthwhile. What is the bargaining chip you'd like to place on the table?" he inquired. "How about you tell me what kind of deal I can strike, and I'll tell you what kind of chip I have," Eric swiftly countered. Seth steepled his fingers as he thought about this for a moment. He hadn't fully thought about a deal. He figured he'd extract the information they needed through their tried and tested method. But if he could obtain a cooperating source without having to go that route, it was certainly worth considering. Finally, Seth nodded. "I'm going to need to check with some folks back in Washington, obviously," he began. "Depending on what you're willing to give up, I'm certain I can get the death penalty taken off the table. As to prison, that's going to be hard. You're going to have to serve some time. I might be able to work that down to 20 years, but I doubt I could get it any lower. Not after all that has transpired with this little scheme of yours." "Fair enough," Eric replied. "If you can get it in writing, signed by your president, that I will serve no more than 20 years in one of your minimum security prisons, I can tell you where Lance Solomon is currently hiding." Seth's left eyebrow rose, and he sat back in his chair for a moment. That would be a big get if he could deliver. We'd only need to find Tate and Peng then, he thought. Seth stood up. "I need to make a call about this. If I can secure a deal for you, you'd better not screw me over on it, or the deal will get shredded and I'll extract the information I need from you in a way you'll regret for the rest of your life." Seth turned to leave the room, but he could tell from the look on Eric's face that he wasn't lying about the information he had. Seth made his way over to the living room of the safe house they were using. Once there, he grabbed the secured satellite phone and placed a call to Major General Lancaster. "This is Lancaster," the gruff voice on the other side responded. "General, it's Mitchell. I just began talking with our friend here in Norway." "Ah, good. Has he given you anything useful yet?" Lancaster asked. "Actually, that's why I'm calling you. Just before I began my usual routine, he told me he can give us the location of Lance Solomon if the president would agree in writing to a sentence of no more than 20 years in a minimum security facility." Seth heard Lancaster laughing. "Is that all?" the general asked. "So, he wants the Club Med treatment, and in exchange he'll give us Solomon, eh?" A pause ensued for a moment before he asked, "Do you think you can still extract the information from him with your bag of tricks, or are you telling me this is the best route for us to take?" Seth took in a deep breath before he replied, "I'm pretty confident I can get the information we need now that he's hinted at knowing where Solomon is. However, the reason I'm interested in taking him up on his deal is that I think we can find out a lot more about how this whole scheme started and who else was involved. Mr. Jan here was the money guy after all. He knows where the funds are, who donated to them. Shoot, he may even know where Marshall Tate is. As good as my bag of tricks is, a cooperating source who has an incentive to spill the beans is always better than trying to get a man to cooperate while under the influence of pharmaceuticals." Seth heard an audible sigh on the other end. "All right, Mitchell. I'll run this up the flagpole. Give me at least a day to get you a decision." Then the call ended, leaving Seth wondering what to do next. Under normal circumstances, he would put the sensory deprivation equipment back on his prisoner and leave him alone and gagged until he had a decision. But if he did that, he might destroy a working relationship he needed to establish with the man. He drummed his fingers on the desk. After a few minutes, an idea occurred to him. This just might work, he thought. 30 minutes later, Seth, 2 other American security guards dressed in civilian attire, along with 4 members of the Norwegian FSK, climbed into the pair of SUVs parked outside the home. The FSK men were a part of Norway's version of the Special Forces. Many of their members had been killed in the war in America, so there was a bit of distrust in having to keep them around the CIA's little operation. But it was a requirement of the Norwegian government if they were going to operate openly in their country. One of the Norwegians sat in the driver's side of the lead SUV, while one of Seth's guys got in the passenger seat. One of the other U.S. guys climbed into the rear third-row bench, while Seth and Eric sat in the 2 captain's chairs in the center of the vehicle. The other 3 FSK members piled into the chase vehicle behind them. Everyone was well-armed, but keeping their weapons out of sight. "Where are we going?" asked Eric, nervous that they were moving locations. "I presented your offer to my superiors. However, I may not get a response back until tomorrow. In the meantime, I thought we'd take a short hike at a nearby park one of the FSK members mentioned. I know you're an avid hiker, and this may be the last chance for you to walk amongst the trails of your native Norway." "That is actually very considerate of you," Eric replied, clearly not sure how to react to the kind gesture. "It's a beautiful day. Why spend it stuck indoors when we can be out amongst nature and enjoy it?" asked Seth. "Besides, I'm tired, Eric. I want a break from all this cloak and dagger stuff as much as I'm sure you do." The vehicle drove to the rear of the park and found a parking spot for both vehicles. The FSK members got out and immediately began to survey the area. All 6 members of the security detail had translucent earpieces in so they could communicate with Seth should they need to. When Seth placed his sunglasses on, he gently depressed a button near the right side of the frame and the lens. It activated a camera and recording device on the glasses and would transmit whatever Seth said or saw to a handful of analysts back at the safe house. Seth had also placed a small microphone and tracking device on Eric's clothes so they could listen to whatever he might say. They weren't taking any chances with him. As the group left to head down one of the trails, one of Seth's guys stayed back at the vehicle for a moment. He pulled a small case out of the back and opened it up. One of the FSK guys stood nearby and raised an eyebrow when he saw the small, compact surveillance drones. Seth's security guy turned both drones on and threw them up into the air. Their little quadcopters activated, and the drones rose rapidly above the trees and then chased after Seth and Eric. With the drones launched, the CIA man began to walk after their charge. The FSK soldier walked briskly to catch up. "How are you controlling them?" he asked, mystified. With a smirk on his face, the CIA man replied, "Magic, my friend, magic." The group walked for 30 minutes into the woods. The trail took them along several beautiful spots along the way, with picturesque views of the surrounding area. Eric breathed in his last moments of freedom. They eventually stopped and took a seat, just the two of them, while their security minders fanned out and turned away to make sure no one came near them. Just as the American seemed to be ready to speak, his smartphone buzzed, letting him know he had a message. He pulled it out and read, then placed his phone back in his pocket. Eric studied the man's facial expressions carefully. His new friend pointed to one of the drones loitering above. "My eye in the sky was telling me they're observing us." Eric grunted. "We were foolish to think we could remove President Sachs," he muttered. The American took a deep breath. "Why did you guys try to remove him?" he asked. "Why not just either let him lose in the election fairly or wait him out?" "He really is naive," thought Eric. He cocked his head to one side as he sized up the man he assumed must be part of the CIA. He decided to answer the question with one of his own. "Why do you think?" "It can't be about money," the man responded. "At least that can't be the only reason." Eric smiled. "Perhaps he's not as clueless as I thought. Maybe I can work with this guy." "You're right. It's not entirely about money." While that was a major driver, it was about more than that. He paused for a moment as he thought about how much he should tell this outsider. Looking out at the scenery before him, Eric asked, "Did you get the response from your superiors about my offer?" Lifting his chin, the CIA man replied, "I did." He produced his smartphone and then showed him a text message he had received. "Deal is a go. There will be an official letter signed by the president when you return to the safe house. Get us the information." Excellent, they are willing to deal, Eric thought. Maybe he could even get them to lower his sentence further if he gave them another big fish. Money is pointless unless you have power, and power is useless unless you have control, Eric said. Can't money buy power? And can it also give you control? Asked the CIA man. Eric shook his head. There is much I can teach you about how the world truly works, he explained, sounding very much like a disappointed professor. First off, even if you have money, you don't have real power. Look at the CEOs of Tesla or Amazon. Both of those men are worth a fortune, but they don't control your country or world affairs. But then you have senators and governors. They may have some political power and maybe some money, and even they are subject to the whims of their political donors. The minute they stop doing as they are told, the spigot of money is turned off, and they get primaried out of their position. Eric paused to unscrew his water bottle and took a couple of gulps. He saw that the American was paying very close attention to him. He didn't appear to be eating out of his hand, but he could tell he was hungry for what he was hearing. You still haven't answered my question, though. Why not wait out Sachs, or let him get unseated through our normal political process? The man pressed. Sachs is a wild card. He's out of control. Our world order relies on precise control of things, and he threw a wrench in that plan, Eric expounded. He had to be removed. We couldn't take a chance that that buffoon would somehow be re-elected by a bunch of disgruntled voters. Why was it so important for you to replace him, though? He can't be that dangerous to the global order, countered the CIA man. Eric let out a long, loud sigh. You still don't see it. See what? Enlighten me. Fine. If you need to be spoon-fed the facts, then that's what I'll do, countered Eric condescendingly. Sachs is dangerous because he represents far more than just rewriting some trade deals to better America. Sachs represents an idea, a belief that is far more dangerous to the global order than just trying to get America a better trade deal. Sachs has made many other leaders around the world and the people of those nations believe that they can have a true voice, that if they stick together, they can overcome globalization, nationalism, and every other form of servitude or bondage. The American's face wrinkled up. Hasn't the argument since he was elected been that Sachs is a nationalist or fascist? Eric snickered. Sachs is no more a nationalist or fascist than his predecessor. Titles and names are thrown around because they incite people. They rile them up. It was a means we used to try and neuter the man. It clearly didn't work, which is why we had to replace him with someone of our choosing. So the thought was that if you didn't remove him now, then what he represents that you feel is a threat to you will somehow spread and you'll lose more control around the world? Asked the CIA man skeptically. In a nutshell, yes, exactly. Eric held a hand up. First, what is your name? He asked. I hate not knowing who I'm addressing. A smile spread across the American's face. Joshua, but you can call me Josh. Eric knew that wasn't his real name, but he went along with it for the time being. Okay, Josh, if you say so. He looked off into the horizon again for a moment before he continued. Josh, it wouldn't have mattered if Sachs was a Democrat or a Republican. We don't care what political party the president belongs to. We only care that he doesn't upset the apple cart. As long as he doesn't stray too far, he's pretty much allowed to do what he wants. Josh, or whoever he was, placed a hand on Eric's arm to pause him before he could go on. You keep saying us and we. Who are you referring to? Now he's using his noodle, thought Eric. I'll share that with you later, he responded. Suffice it to say, we only care about being left alone to do our business. To be honest with you, we never thought Sachs would find out about the postal worker scheme. We certainly didn't think he'd be able to link the Islamic terrorists to China and Germany. What really led us to believe we had miscalculated the situation, however, was when he opted to fight the UN and not leave office. He'd been offered a handsome amount of money to leave, but he wouldn't. That's when I, at least, knew the jig was up. We had overplayed our hand. So how does Lance Solomon play into all of this? Was he just the face of the money operation in America? Asked Josh. Eric tilted his head to the right, I'm sure at this point you know Lance is a member of the Skull and Bone Society, he stated. The CIA man nodded. We've always worked with the Bones to help pick presidents. There are a few other groups from time to time as well, but it was their turn to have a member in the White House. Lance picked Tate and told us who to throw our weight behind. He also set up the super PACs we were supposed to plus up with cash. Lance was also responsible for buying off many of the people in government who could have found out about our plot earlier on. If it hadn't been for Lance, I doubt this entire thing would have even taken off the ground. So where is he now? Josh prodded. He's here, in Norway. The CIA man pursed his lips but didn't say anything. He seemed skeptical. He's here, Eric insisted. He's undergone some plastic surgery to change his looks, and he's living under a new identity. I helped him get his finances and new identity established. He's currently staying in a house in Trondheim, Norway. Give me a piece of paper and I'll write down his address for you. Josh handed him a small notepad he had in one of his pockets and a pen. Eric proceeded to write down the details. We're going to check this address out, the CIA man announced. If it pans out, then your deal is still good. If you're lying to us, then I will extract the information from you in another manner, and I'm sure you won't find it enjoyable. Eric studied the man. He saw a glint of something in his eyes. He didn't doubt for a second that this Josh was more than capable of getting the information he wanted from him. He wondered why he had been allowed to cut a deal if he was a skilled extractor. There's more to this man's strategy than I first thought. He's there, Eric maintained. Do you mind if we stay in Norway until you verify he's there? If something does go wrong, I'll have more ways of finding him if I can stay here than if I'm in America. The CIA man nodded, and then signaled their security detail that they were heading back to the safe house. Oslo, Norway. The surveillance team had been sitting on the address Eric Jan had provided for 2 days now. In that time, they had spotted Mr. Solomon leave his house at least 6 times. Each morning, he'd purchase some bread and croissants from the bakery just down the road. Around lunchtime, he'd go for a 4-mile run and then return home. Then at dinner time, he'd meander into town and eat at a local restaurant. Seth was sure if they kept watching him, they wouldn't see much deviation in Lance Solomon's daily routine. The discussion among his colleagues centered on how much longer they should wait until they snatched him. Seth decided to leave the room with the monitors, walk down the hall, and fill in the information gaps. Seth spotted the man with the information and walked toward him. Commander, can you give me an update on when our ship arrives? The naval attaché to the embassy turned to look at Seth. He placed his coffee cup down on the table and made a quick call. He relayed a request to his assistant and waited for the response. Smiling, he looked back at Seth. The USS Jason Dunham is still about 18 hours away. Thank you, Seth replied as he nodded. He walked back down to the monitoring room. Are we taking this guy down soon? Asked one of the team members from TF Avenger. Seth grinned. Yes, he responded. Let's get our FSK guys over here. It's time to talk about the takedown. We're still going to let the Norwegians take him into custody? The same team member asked. This would really be better done by us. I agree, and I'd love for us to be the ones to raid the home, but we're guests of the Norwegian government, Seth responded. Thus far, they've given us everything we've wanted or needed. Tell Joe to go with them, though. I want him on scene to take Solomon into custody once the FSK has secured the home. 4 hours later, the 8 members of Task Force Avenger in Oslo were on a video call with the Minister of Justice, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Defense. Seth briefed them on Mr. Solomon and asked for final approval of the plan to take the American hiding in their midst into custody. The Norwegian leaders agreed unanimously without any hesitation. Then the video call transitioned to a conversation with the Minister of Defense, the head of the Norwegian military, and the head of the FSK. Seth went over how he'd like to see the raid go down, and the leaders were generally amiable to his suggestions. Now, while the FSK will be the ones to breach the home and capture Mr. Solomon, I'd like to request that 2 of my counterparts that are currently in Trondheim be allowed to advise the team on the raid, Seth requested. What are their backgrounds? Asked the FSK leader. Can they handle being a part of a raid like this? The 2 men are active members of the U.S. Army's Delta Force, Seth answered bluntly. The FSK chief smiled and nodded his consent. Trondheim, Norway. Master Sergeant Bruce Deuce Wilder and Sergeant First Class Larry Flint walked around the back of the police station. They kept their heads low and eyes sharp as they made their way to the back entrance of the police station. Deuce rapped his knuckles on the back door and waited. A few seconds later the door opened, and a uniformed police officer came into view. The man lifted an eyebrow when he saw Deuce and Larry, but held the door open for them to come in. "Good evening," he said, sounding rather formal. "Follow me to the briefing room. The others are waiting there." Deuce couldn't help but notice a lot of odd looks from the police officers and staff as he and Larry walked through their facility with their large black hockey bags slung over their shoulders. Deuce smiled. He knew he and his compatriot didn't exactly look like the kind of guys you'd want to pick a fight with. To the Norwegians, they probably didn't look like they belonged in a police station without handcuffs on. Larry wasn't a particularly big man. He stood around 6'1", but under his loose-fitting shirt, he was built like a brick house. He was a deadly jiu-jitsu master and one hell of an operator. Deuce had a similar background. He had a 4th-degree black belt in Krav Maga. Like Larry, he'd spent some time in Rangers before moving to selection with the unit. Deuce was only 5'10", so he was shorter and not nearly as built as his friend. However, he liked to think he was much better looking, especially when he had his goatee braided into a pair of 2-inch Viking braids. The police officer then opened the briefing room door and said something in Norwegian to the group. One of the men waved for them to come in and sit in the back row. Deuce and Larry took their cue and walked over to a couple of empty chairs and a table. The other FSK men were suiting up, while their leader appeared to be talking to them about some aspect of the raid. Neither Larry nor Deuce could speak a word of Norwegian, so they went to work on getting their own gear set up. Deuce unzipped one of the large bags he'd brought with him and pulled out his FN Scar SC, along with all the gear he liked to have on it for a mission like this. Next he grabbed his Tier 1 body armor with the newest in-liquid gel inner shell. He placed his helmet on the table and then proceeded to do an equipment check of his rifle while Larry did the same. Pausing for a moment, Deuce noticed the police officer who had brought them to the room was standing near the door, still eyeing them suspiciously. Ignoring the stares, Deuce pulled his chest rig over his head and cinched the side straps, tightening it against his chiseled body. His Oneg blood type patch showed on the front of his rig, along with his Punisher patch and a few others he'd added for fun. At this point, the 10 other FSK men in the room had stopped talking and watched Deuce and Larry as they fastened their helmets in place and attached their weapons to the single-point sling. Continuing with their task, Deuce and Larry began to do a quick rattle check by jumping in place a couple of times. They tightened up a few items before they took their equipment off. The man in front of the room, who appeared to be in charge, announced in English, "I'm Major Sunda. You are our 2 American observers. What exactly is your background? And why are you suiting up like you are going with us?" Looking at the Major, Deuce replied, "We're from the unit. We're here to help you guys take Mr. Solomon into custody." The Major lifted his chin up a bit. "I wasn't aware we were being sent to Delta Force operators, yes?" "Yes, Major. We're both from Delta," Deuce confirmed. "We were told your men will conduct the breach. Our job is to take Mr. Solomon into custody." Major Sunda nodded in approval. "Okay, you can come with us. I still need you to let us lead the raid, but if you have ideas on how to do it better, we'll certainly listen." For the next hour, Deuce and Larry went over the plan again. They made a lot of recommendations on how to breach the home better in order to ensure Mr. Solomon wasn't injured. This was, after all, a grab mission, not a kill mission. When they felt like they had everything reasonably in order, they all headed down the hallway to the 2 vans that would take them to the target's home. They piled in. Moments later, they headed into the city. Deuce sent a quick text message to the American contingent monitoring the raid, letting them know they were on their way to the target. They also made sure the wireless connections on their body and helmet cameras were working correctly. This would allow the team in Oslo to see what they were seeing. The 2 vans moved through the sleepy city with ease. There was no traffic, virtually no vehicles or buses moving about. There wasn't even an early morning jogger at 0400 hours. It was all but silent as they stealthily moved towards their objective. As the vans approached the target's home, the FSK operators switched back to their native language. When the van stopped in front of the house, the doors were silently opened as the operators spilled out of the 2 vehicles, weapons at the ready as they moved. 5 of the FSK men and Larry ran around to the back of the home. Deuce, along with the team leader and 4 other FSK operators, advanced to the front door. The breacher placed a specially designed breaching tool against the seam of the front door and the frame. Deuce smiled when he noticed it was the same tool the U.S. military used. Crowbar on the front, mallet on the other end, with a collapsible handle that could extend to give them more leverage. Once he'd placed the pry bar gently into the frame where the door lock was located, the breacher applied just enough force to separate the door from the frame, enough to allow them to open it. With the front door unlocked, the soldier gently pushed it open, and the operators began to rapidly search the first floor. As they came around to the rear of the house, one of the operators turned the lock on the back door and quietly let in the team that had been waiting just outside. Major Sunda pointed to the staircase, indicating to Deuce that he should follow him up. The 2 of them crept up to the next story in the house. The rest of the team followed behind. The group of men fanned out behind Deuce and Sunda to place themselves near the closed door of the master bedroom. Turning the handle slowly, Sunda opened the door to reveal a single figure sprawled out on the bed. He had a blanket covering half his body, with the other half exposed to the cool air that was circulating in the room due to a ceiling fan. Sunda motioned for Deuce to make the arrest. Deuce nodded and pulled a pair of flex cuffs off his chest rig. Silently, he approached Mr. Solomon. Before he placed the cuffs on the man that would be his prisoner, Deuce pulled a small syringe from one of his front pouches. In one seamless move, he injected the man with the drug as he held his hand over his mouth, watching until his body went limp. Once he'd put the syringe away, Deuce grabbed Mr. Solomon's hands and zip-tied them. Major Sunda flicked the lights on and called out that they had secured the target. He then stormed up to Deuce. "Is he still alive?" he asked angrily. "Of course he's alive," Deuce insisted. "A dead man can't tell tales. We need this guy to sing. I only knocked him out so when he wakes up, he's in new surroundings with no idea how he got there." Major Sunda's expression softened. "Okay, good. I was told it was imperative that this man be caught alive. I didn't want to discover you guys killed him when we clearly could have captured him." Deuce smiled. "No worries, boss. He's alive. You can check his pulse. This is how we like to perform our grabs if we can. It leaves very little to chance if he's knocked out when we capture him." The team carried Mr. Solomon out of the house to the vans waiting out front. It was now 04:06 hours. The neighborhood was still asleep and completely oblivious to what had just happened. 30 minutes later, the group sat waiting in their vehicles in the parking lot near the Hurtigruten port along the waterfront of Trondheim. Eventually, they heard what they'd been expecting: the thudding rotor blades of a V-22 Osprey as it headed toward them. Deuce got out of the vehicle and cracked a couple of extra-large chem sticks, throwing them into the center of the empty parking lot. Larry already had Mr. Solomon thrown over his shoulder. Major Sunda extended his hand to Deuce. "Thank you for your help," Deuce said as he shook the Major's hand. When the Osprey had settled on the ground, Larry ran toward the rear ramp with the package. A couple of Marines came out to greet them and helped Larry get Mr. Solomon on board. Deuce then trotted off to climb aboard himself. He stood near the ramp exit as the Osprey lifted off and gave a quick salute to the FSK operators below. A second later, the tilt rotor speeded towards their mothership, the USS America, which was stationed no more than 20 miles away and flanked by 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers. USS America. "How long has he been awake?" Seth asked of one of the CIA men who had been keeping an eye on Mr. Solomon. "Once he got here, we put the devices on as you requested and woke him up. He's been awake with the equipment running for 6 hours. Seth smiled and nodded. "Good. He's going to be thoroughly exhausted and disoriented by now." Then he headed out of their observation room and walked down the silent corridor to the room where they were holding Mr. Solomon. This part of the ship had been cleared of any personnel, besides the couple of TF Avenger team members that were standing guard at both ends of the hallway. Seth entered the small room that would be used for questioning and sat down opposite Mr. Solomon. He nodded for the guard to remove the equipment from his prisoner's eyes and ears and cut the man's zip ties. It took Mr. Solomon a good 30 seconds of blinking and rubbing his eyes before he was able to focus on his new surroundings. Although he wouldn't know exactly where he was, he would probably be able to tell they were on some kind of ship. The amphibious assault ship didn't rock too much in the water, but it still swayed a bit with the waves. Mr. Solomon blinked several times and rubbed his eyes. Then, noticing Seth for the first time, he whispered, "Where am I?" "You are aboard a U.S. warship," Seth explained. Lance Solomon's facial expressions remained stoic. Seth had to hand it to him. For a man who'd been captured in the middle of the night and drugged, he didn't seem in the least bit surprised. "Can I have some water?" Mr. Solomon asked. Seth smiled warmly. "Of course you can." Then he handed him the bottle of water he'd brought with him. Seth had already mixed the happy drug into the beverage. He didn't want to wait around to see if his prisoner would cooperate. He needed to find out quickly if Mr. Solomon knew where Marshal Tate was, or who else was involved in this conspiracy. He still had Mr. Jan providing him information willingly for the time being, and he didn't want the man to have a sudden change of heart. Mr. Solomon gulped half the bottle down. "If we're going to talk with each other, what is your name?" he inquired. It was clear that his wits were steadily coming back to him. He seemed like he was gearing up for a tough negotiation for Goldman Sachs. "You can call me Josh. At least, that's what my friends call me," Seth replied. "I don't think you and I are going to be friends, but you can call me Lance." Seth noticed the man's eyes glazing over as the drug took effect. "Okay, Lance, I have an urgent question I need to ask you. We believe President Marshal Tate is in grave danger. Our warship has been sent to rescue him before the forces loyal to Sachs are able to capture him. But right now, we believe you are the only man who can provide us with his exact location." giving him a quizzical look, Lance asked, "If you aren't on Sax's side, then why did you kidnap me and bring me here?" Seth leaned in closer. "We had to make it appear like we're working for Sax," he replied in a hushed tone. "National Security Advisor Paige Larson sent us here at great risk to our ongoing operations to locate Marshall before he's captured. Once we know where he is, we'll be able to use our position on board this ship to help him stay at least 1 or 2 steps ahead of the military that's hunting him. Are you able to help, or was Paige wrong to have sent us?" At this point, Lance looked really confused. The drugs were wreaking havoc on his ability to think clearly. Sensing that Lance might not be buying his ruse, Seth whispered, "Eric Yan told us you were Marshall's American money guy. He said if anyone knew where Marshall was right now, it would be you, because you handled the finances for him." Lance nodded like a person who's had one too many alcoholic beverages. "Okay. If Paige and Eric told you to get in touch with me, then I believe you," he responded. "I don't know the specific location where President Tate currently is, but I do know the bank account that's being used to pay for his security detail and his lodgings. Every 7 days, they change to a new bank account so they can stay ahead of the Treasury Department. Do you have a pen and paper? I'll write it down for you. Once you look at the most recent payment history, you should be able to figure out where he is. You need to move quickly, though, if we are to get Tate moved to China. It won't take Sax's people long to find him now that the UN force collapsed." "Okay. Yes, that makes sense," Seth answered him reassuringly. "Is it possible that we can get him moved to China? Maybe we can steer the Navy in the wrong direction." I'm not totally sure on that part. I believe they were going to move him to Russia and then fly him to China," Lance explained. "I don't think there are any commercial flights between the U.S. or Canada and Russia right now. So do you know what ship he's on?" Lance shrugged his shoulders. Then his eyes grew wider. "Peter. I bet they are going to use Peter's yacht." Seth fought to control his facial expressions. "Which Peter? There are like 1 million people in Russia named that." "Peter Maslov. He's a Russian oligarch. He's also a member of the Thule Society." "Aren't you a high-ranking member of the Thule Society?" Seth asked, trying to piece together this new information with what Eric Yan had already told him. Lance shook his head. "No, not at all. Even though I'm the head of Goldman Sachs, I'm only a mid-level member. Roberto, Eric, Pang An, and Johan are senior members. They're involved in the key decisions of the group." Seth nodded. "Okay, that makes sense, Lance. Was the organization itself behind the rigging of the election, or was it some rogue elements within it?" Lance Solomon shrugged. "Does it matter?" he asked flippantly. "I mean, I think key leaders in the organization may have been involved, but I don't know who all the members are or what their involvement has been. I was just supposed to set up the money funnels needed for Tate to win. When that failed, I helped to redirect that money so it could be spent supporting the CDF militias and fund some of the private military contractors that were being flown in to help stir up more trouble inside the country." "Ah, yes, the PMCs. Do you know which specific ones were going to be used and where? They aren't going to try and actually use American ones, are they?" Lance broke out in laughter. "Most certainly not. No. They're going to use several different ones for different functions. For instance, Defion International is a Peruvian PMC. These PMCs primarily speak Spanish, so they're going to be used in Texas and California. They'll help the Chinese to pacify the captured cities, while their army stays focused on capturing the country. The Seneca Group is responsible for providing a lot of the ground intelligence and counterinsurgency operations in the captured states to support the Chinese forces. They also supported the UN mission prior to it dissolving. I'm not sure what happened to their northern operation once the UN fell apart, They most likely tried to make their way closer to the Chinese positions to help stir up trouble, and eventually link back in with their other groups down there." Lance paused for a moment, clearly struggling to remember details. This was one of the few drawbacks Seth saw in the drugs. When his subjects suddenly became chatty and cooperative, they were often hindered in how much deep knowledge they could provide. "Ah, yes, sorry. Lost my train of thought there for a moment," Lance said, as he seemed to shake off his mental fog. The Wagner Group was just contracted to send in their force to join the Chinese in their attempt to finish capturing Texas. Before Johann killed himself, he had also succeeded in getting the German Chancellor to turn a blind eye to the Asgard Security Group to assist the Chinese in capturing the West Coast. Then there are also a couple of Chinese PMCs that were contracted to help augment their operations in California, but I honestly can't tell you what their names are. I'm sadly not very good at pronouncing their Chinese names." Lance blushed a bit. "So you mean to tell me all these private military companies have already been paid to go assist the Chinese in the Southwest?" Seth asked. "I mean, what has all this cost the Thule Society?" "They were expensive. I was against spending the money once I saw the writing on the wall after that German division surrendered in Chicago. That's why I started making my plans to disappear in Norway. But Johann was insistent that these groups be hired and sent to try and help the Chinese. Then Johann had to go and take the easy route when things started falling apart," Lance said with a snort. "The bastard should have stuck around to help us continue the fight." He let out a long sigh before he looked back at Seth. "You have to understand, it wasn't supposed to turn out like this. We hadn't developed a plan for what to do if Sachs opted to actually fight the UN Peacekeepers. Had we known he was going to do that, we would have had these PMCs in place at the outset of the mission, and we would have had them infiltrate the country much sooner. Everything we've been doing has largely been on the fly, with less than reliable partners. I mean, look at the Chinese. They screwed this whole thing up by waiting nearly a month to start military operations. Had they hit the Southwest when we hit the Northeast, there's a good chance Sachs would not still be in power right now. But that didn't happen. Personally, I think Pang must have convinced someone in the organization to change plans, or he used his knowledge to change the plans for his benefit. But that's my theory. I think Eric would be able to give you a better read on that than I can. He and Pang have known each other for a very long time." Seth nodded. They talked for another hour or so about the finer details of the Thule Society and the private military contractors. Lance wrote down all of the important banking information. At that point, it was only a matter of time until the drug wore off. Seth spent a few more minutes talking with Lance, giving him some additional details about how he needed to play things out while he was on the ship. Seth told Lance he should trust only him and only talk to him unless he confirmed that the person was safe. Lance nodded his head in agreement, and then Seth slid an Ambien pill across the table. Lance stared at the white pill with a quizzical look. "I need you to take this so you'll fall into a nice, long, deep sleep," Seth explained. "I'll convince them to leave the sensory deprivation devices off you because you've been cooperative," he said with a wink. "But this will make you collapse into sleep. No one else will be able to question you if you're passed out, okay?" Lance nodded happily. "I'll come back and talk to you some more at a later date. But for the time being, I'm going to try and do what I can to make sure Sachs and his cronies don't capture President Tate, okay?" Lance nodded vigorously. "Okay, Josh, I'll do my best to play stupid and only talk with you. I'm sure glad Paige and Eric sent you for me. I wasn't sure how much longer I was going to make it before Sachs's people found me." Leaning in, Seth whispered, "Remember, right now, Sachs and his people think they've captured you. Everyone on board this ship thinks they've captured you. What they don't know is that I'm on your side and not theirs. We have to keep that a secret between us, so I can get you and Marshall out of this mess, okay?" Lance smiled a devilish smile. He popped the pill Seth had given him, and then walked over to the small cot in the room and lay down. With nothing more to discuss, Seth got up and headed out the door. He briefly looked at the footage from one of the 2 hidden cameras that were in the room before he left to go over what they'd just uncovered. They needed to get this information run up the flagpole immediately so it could be disseminated to the appropriate forces.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.